Welcome to the Now to Next podcast, where every week we provide wisdom on how to press play after a traumatic pause. If you are starting up or starting over in any area of your life or your business, subscribe and listen as we share real life stories from actual people who have pressed play and are winning after nearly losing it all. And now, your host, Octoria Robinson.
Hi there, my friends. Are you ready to press play today? I'd like to welcome to the Now to Next podcast our guest for today, Etta Rahming. How are you?
Good morning. I'm great.
You sound so trippery. I'm so excited to have you on our show today. I can't wait for our listeners to connect to the wealth of wisdom that you bring. And just from all your experience, go ahead and share a little bit about yourself, Etta, so they can connect and we'll get started.
Okay, a little bit about myself. Currently, I'm a full-time school psychologist in Hillsborough County. My background as far as education is started out as sociology, then I have a master's in social work, and then what's called an EDS degree in school psychology. I've been in the Florida area since 2006. I've lived in the Caribbean. I'm originally from New York. The types of jobs I've had in the past, I've been probation officer, warrant officer, worked in substance abuse, addiction, drug abuse, and also worked with children that have been abused, protective services. So that's, so my background is somewhat eclectic.
Wow, you are packing it. My goodness, I'm glad I'm all on the up and up today that I don't get arrested after this call. Just kidding. But I'm so excited to talk about a difficult, sensitive subject that we have formed this podcast out of, which is trauma. I don't think there's one element of society or demographic or generation that has not been affected or impacted by trauma. It comes and steals the life and motivation and passion of so many people, both male and female. And our heartbeat on the Now to Next podcast is if we can inspire and touch just a few to press play after trauma, then we would have been able to have made a difference in this world. So we bring guests that share stories, and I mean the stories are life transforming, from divorce to sexual abuse to addictions, even the loss of loved ones. I mean, it goes from one end to another. And again, our aim is to help them press play. But still, we also want to equip them with tools, resources, and professional guidance to ensure that they're not just inspired, but still not yet healed or whole. So we're inviting you today to really explore this subject of trauma. What is it? Why is it so hard to overcome? Why does the pain seem to be something that becomes who we are, how we think, the decisions we make, the relationships that we entertain, the intimacy that we have in life? What is it about trauma? And I'll hand it over to you to go ahead and begin a discussion on that, Etta.
Okay, briefly, trauma can be defined and is defined in different ways in, the dictionary, the medical field, as anything that's a psychological or emotional response to an event that you find disturbing or distressing. Now, here's the thing about trauma. It also has to do with the lens that you're looking at your situation from. So what person A finds to be trauma, person B might not find to be trauma, and vice versa. It doesn't take away from the person's experience. It just means they experience life differently, or they're looking at it through a different lens. all the jobs that I indicated that I worked at, they involve people that have gone through trauma. I've gone through trauma in my life also. And then what does it do to you? Sometimes people can become desensitized to trauma. And what I mean is that your whole life and everything you do, you may experience some type of trauma to the point it becomes almost every day. It's just the way I live. So I'm desensitized to it, that I don't see or know what it really has done to me or what it's doing to me. And then I might find out later on through a maladaptive relationship. And what I mean by that is the way I cope in relationships or the way I don't cope. What happens on my job when I have to do something and it involves working with people, and that person might have reminded me of a parent or someone who inflicted a trauma, and I'm reacting to them in the situation as like it was the original situation, but it really isn't. And you hear that sometimes when you ask people, like, what happened? And they'll tell you, I don't know. Well, what is it about that person? I don't know. And a lot of times they don't know, because your recollection can actually be unconscious. It could be a smell. It could be a memory that you don't have completely, but you know you had the emotion attached to it. And a lot of times you need someone to sound off so that you can get to the root of it, but at the pace that works for you. So everybody can't go at the same pace.
Wow. Etta, you said some key things I want to recap and even dig a little deeper on. You spoke about how our perspective really defines the impact of trauma. So it's very personal. But as you went deeper into the things that you were sharing, you also said that trauma can desensitize you. So my thoughts are, and I'm sure some of our listeners may be thinking, okay, if my perspective has already been affected or infected by trauma and now I'm desensitized in that place, what is actually going to give me the permission to grieve from a healthy perspective, something that was not normal, that was inappropriate or painful? What's going to be that thing that actually gives me the okay to grieve if the very thing that I need, which is perspective and emotions, are polluted already by trauma?
Yeah, in that case, I always would recommend some type of counseling. And I say some type because what works for one person might not work for the other person. Some people, they would go to spiritual counseling. So there might be a pastor or whoever does spiritual counseling in a church. Some people might go to a clinic. Some people might go to group therapy. Some people might go to one-on-one therapy. Some people actually might go to someone for tutoring services, but at the same time get counseling. So they may be going for something else, but because they have a rapport with that person, they open up about what took place in their life, and that person's equipped to help them deal with it because they're eclectic. Sometimes I find that happens when I'm tutoring people. The trauma comes out because we discuss a lot of times what happened in school, how far they got in school, and then they'll start to talk about other things. And so a little counseling gets in there also, but it just depends on what the person needs at that point in time.
So what role would you say shame plays in masking a trauma that someone has walked through or experienced? Because again, I agree with the perspective and how trauma desensitizes you, but I personally know that shame silenced me. I remained silent in a place outside of my head. I would not express. So what role would you say shame comes in when it comes to the lack of expression or communication regarding things that have occurred?
I put shame in the same category or a similar category, let's say, as I would put fear and rejection. Shame, fear, rejection, all those put a person at a point where if I said something about it, I'm going to be seen a certain way or I'm going to be viewed a certain way. And the shame, the fear, or the rejection could be so much stronger than the original trauma. It prevents them from speaking up or sharing what took place. And that depends on the age that the trauma took place. It depends on what was indoctrinated into the person, like what thoughts the person said to them, what did they grab a hold of. No one wants to be rejected. No one wants to feel like they did something, or no one wants to feel dirty, and no one wants to feel like fear, and no one wants to feel those negative kind of feelings. But those are the feelings that some rejection, some trauma can actually make you feel. So the feeling, the emotion becomes stronger than the original trauma. And also confusion plays a part in it. There's some trauma, because of the age that it took place and the person not understanding what even took place, confusion takes place. And then when they get an understanding, later on, shame might take place. Mm-hmm. And then when they see something that happened with someone else and how people responded, rejection might take place. So all those feelings take on a life of their own. So it makes it harder to get to the original trauma unless the person goes through some type of counseling. But again, once they get to the counseling, you might have to deal with the shame. You might have to deal with the fear, the rejection, the confusion before you get to the original trauma.
You just said a word that I feel like a lot of us, and I do say us because I was impacted by trauma and I actually responded in this way. Instead of dealing, we choose to run from or ignore or deny. Can you express the danger that brings to a whole mindset or a whole and healthy life if we choose running, denial, or just really ignoring the fact that something that shouldn't have happened in our lives happened?
Yeah, I'm going to give you like an example also. I've been where someone might say to a group of people, how many people have ever been molested? And I've heard people say, well, that happened a long time ago. Why we got to go over there? Well, why are they going over there? And I've usually heard it from the older people, the more mature people in age. And what always comes to me is that they don't realize how that original trauma from their childhood still has impacted them because of the way they deal with relationships. So if it's not dealt with in a functional manner, it becomes dysfunctional, or it'll stay dysfunctional. And that way, the relationships we have with people won't become enriched. We won't get the full benefit of being in relationships with people because fear, because judgment, because confusion, all those things, they get to play out more than being able to have relationships. And I'm talking about any kind of relationships. It doesn't have to be an intimate relationship as far as like a man and a woman or a husband and a wife or whatever. It could be your relationship on your job. It could be your relationship with your children. It could be your relationship with your parents. It could be anywhere there's a relationship that it will impact the way we deal with people and cope with disagreement and cope with changes and cope with when we're not all on the same page. So someone might find someone to be offensive, but why? Why do you find them offensive? Is it that they remind you of someone? And sometimes they remind you of yourself. Well, it's not them. It's your interpretation and the feeling that it invokes. I don't want to deal with the feeling, so something else comes out, and that becomes stronger than me having to deal with the impact of what this person means to me or the impact of what I'm feeling.
Wow. So we can't afford to deny what we need to deal with, or we'll end up stuck. And unfortunately, a lot of us experience that. I'm very transparent in my process. I've been stuck, I like to say, for about 2 decades. I was stuck because I didn't want to deal with what had happened to me. I refused to process it. I refused to accept that it was an issue or a thing that occurred in my world. I refused to accept it. So a lot of our guests bring stories of how they overcame, but I'm certain that there are people who are a little bit on the skeptical side and are thinking, well, that was them. It's absolutely impossible for me to heal after my specific trauma. What would you say to a listener that feels it's impossible to heal or recover after trauma?
Well, I would say I would say definitely it is possible at any age. I'm in my 60s, and I'm in another level of dealing with trauma that took place, as it turns out, even before the age of 5. And is it important? Yeah, it's important, because it gives me more of an understanding why there's some people that I click to better, and then others, I've been more like backed up from. And it really had nothing to do with them. It had to do with my uncomfortableness with some people. Traits, they reminded me of different people. But it is important because the quality of your life is important. How do you want to live your life? Do you want to live it the fullest? Do you want to live the best life you can? And to live the best life you can and the fullest does mean dealing with certain areas in your life that you didn't. And here's the thing, it's never too late, and it's always levels. So some people might say, well, I dealt with that when I went to a group when I was in my 20s. Yeah, you did, but is there residual? And a lot of times there is. And so when you're ready, you deal with it on another level, and you deal with it on another level. And it makes you happier, and it makes the people around you happier.
Wow. So the theme that I keep hearing and the things that you've been sharing, it requires us to deal with it. Even if we don't feel like we should have the responsibility. I'm sure someone's thinking, well, I didn't do this to myself. Why can't they just deal with why they did it to me and apologize and I get better? Or why can't I just move on without having to resurrect these toxic emotions that I thought were going to take me out in every capacity that I could be taken out emotionally? Why? My friends, if you're sitting and you're listening, or you're driving, or you're in your kitchen or somewhere and you're thinking, why? Why, Octoria? Why, Etta? Why do I have to do something regarding something I didn't invite into my own life? Why can't it go away? We're not saying we have a response to that why, but we are sharing that.
Most of the time, we didn't cause the trauma. Yeah. That's not, but we feel the full effects of it. We can't wait for the other person. The other person may never get to where they will apologize. They may not even see that they did anything wrong. Let's take another kind of trauma, a medical trauma. There's some of us, and this is me, who have had multiple surgeries, who've been in accidents, who've had multiple issues with their physical body. Each time is a trauma. But if you don't deal with it, the accumulation of it it will wear you down. It will make you miserable. And a lot of times when you meet people in chronic pain, they don't always have the best disposition. So the quality of your life, my life, is what gets affected. Mm-hmm. Not what the person or the events that caused the trauma. If you want a better quality of life, if you don't want to be depressed or as depressed, if you don't want to be fearful of people, or if you don't want to not engage with people because you want to keep your defenses up because you're protecting yourself, it will increase your ability of your life to live it fully. You can't live your life fully when that trauma, the effects of it, the residue of it, is really controlling your life.
Wow. Well, Etta, I know we could stay on this topic for hours, but we're nearing the end of our interview today. I want to thank you again. And to sum up what I had just heard you say, I'd say it in this way, listeners. What you don't deal with, you live with. What you don't deal with, you'll live with it. So today you have a decision. You can deal with it and live empowered from it, or you cannot and live with the pain of it. That choice remains yours. I'd like for you, Etta, to be able to express ways that our listeners can connect with you if they need more information regarding this topic we spoke on today.
They can feel free to send me an email, and I'm going to spell it out. Send me an email, address it, the podcast, because when it's a different address that I've never seen before, that way I'll recognize it. That it's not it should go into the scam and stuff like that. So my email address is, these are all small letters, lowercase letters, ETTA, and then my last name is R-A-H, M as in man, I-N as in Nancy, G, @gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, listeners, you have an incredible, when I tell you incredible resource in Etta. We've only just untopped the wealth of wisdom and just knowledge that she has and compassion in this area. As you can hear from her brief description of what she does in her professional life, she's dedicated the majority of her life to helping people who have been affected by trauma. In closing, guys, remember, the end of your story does not have to be traumatic. It can be triumphant. But that decision is yours to be made. Until we connect again, I pray you guys have an awesome rest of your week.
Thank you for tuning into our podcast today. For all things Launch Now, log on to launchnowus.com for info on products, resources, and upcoming events. We are looking forward to connecting with you and enriching your life through our next episode. And remember, you have what it takes to press play. Have a super duper epic week.